You're listening to the All Things Data Podcast, the show that brings you insights and informed conversation around today's ever-advancing knowledge economy. In the spirit of Daniel Kahneman, Peter Diamandis, and Google Moonshots, All Things Data brings together leading data scientists, technologists, business model experts, and futurists to discuss how to utilize, harness, and deploy data science, data-driven strategies, and enable digital transformation. Your hosts are Dan Yarmaluk, Dr. Manjeet Reghe, and Thomas Marlowe.
Hi, and welcome back to All Things Data. Tom Marlowe here with Dan Yarmaluk. How's it going, Dan?
Good, Tom. I'm excited about today's podcast introducing our next guest.
Yeah, me too. We've got another Dan with us, Dan Binman, Chief Data Scientist with Yixue, better known probably as Squirrel AI Learning, which is doing some pretty interesting stuff in the field of education, which, you know, these days, given the, I guess, the abundance of remote learning that's happening, education and computerized education is really becoming more and more of a hot topic. So, Dan, pleasure to have you on.
It's a pleasure to be here. I'm excited.
Yeah, thanks. So can you give us a little bit more background into some of the things that Squirrel AI is doing and some of the things you're involved with there?
Yeah, sure. Let me first tell you a little bit about the kind of the market and what our target business is for Squirrel AI. So right now, most of the focus in terms of product is really on the product in China, and that it changes. You know, in China things move rapidly, but at least, you know, mostly it's been the focus up until now. The focus has been on kind of after school education. So in China, there's these high stakes tests, and these high stakes tests really determine the students' path, right? Which high school they're going to go to, which college they're going to go to. The Junkao and the Gaokao are the name of these tests, and they basically determine where the students will go. So kind of like our SATs or ACTs here, but more high stakes even. Okay, so and in education really means a lot in China, and so parents will do kind of anything to have their kids do better. So in China, especially in the cities, the 90% of kids basically take an after school program to improve their scores on these tests, right? So this is not part of their actual regular K-12 education, which they do a lot. They spend a lot of time on, but basically they then prepare after that to do as well on these tests as possible. And that's where our focus is. So basically, we have kind of two business models. In one business model, we have learning centers, and so and this is done kind of all over China. And I think at this time we probably have over 2,000 of these, and really they're all over China, and they can be in very rural areas as well. And then and those basically the kids go there after school. It's basically like a school after school, and they're using our online products. I mean, they're at a franchise. They're at this learning center, but they use our online products, and that's one model. The other model is that in big cities like Shanghai and Beijing, we do it direct with the students, and we have actually like a virtual set of kind of guides to help like groups of students go through things. And the idea is that what we're looking for with this product is, and what the customers, the parents and students are looking for, is basically to see the greatest improvement in their test scores for the least amount of work, if you will. Of course, they have to work hard, but will that hard work be rewarded with a much better test score? And that's the challenge in building the products, right? So we have to build the products to kind of do that. Now, one thing that's really exciting about our company is our leader, Derek, is a very dynamic individual. And he, I don't know if he even sleeps. He's incredible. And so,
Sure.
he is constantly looking for the best things, okay, and to improve the products and things like that. So, he's hired some outside experts, including me and my boss, Richard Tong, and we're also working with CMU. Tom Mitchell and Ken Kodinger are working with us as well. And so, we have a lot of collaborators, and that part is more on the research. It's not for right now in the products, but it's like how we can build the products to be better 2 or 3 years down the line. And for things like that, we're looking at possibly using brainwave imaging, maybe using facial recognition.
Oh, interesting.
Right. So because one of the things that we're dealing with is that, and I have a lot of experience building products that have to do just with the content and kind of the interaction with the student with the content. But I think all of us in kind of AI education are learning that that's important, and efficiency, like I was just talking to you about, is important, but it's not maybe as important as we thought, and engagement is maybe more important. So one way to think of that is imagine two students, a student that tries two different systems. In system A, he worked 10 hours to learn this much. And in system B, he had to work 15 hours to learn that much. Now, in the old days, we'd say system A is better than system B because it only took 10 hours for the student to learn what it took him 15 hours to do on the other system. But imagine, if you will, that system B, the students love system B. So on average, each week, the students spend 25 hours in system B. But in system A, they only spend 7 hours. Well, they're going to do better with system B, even though it is less efficient, because it is more engaging.
Because they actually do it.
That's right. And so, one of the things so a lot of our focus is on engagement, at least in terms of the experimental, kind of the more research side. Now, in terms of the product right now, that's moving all the time. We're trying to, improve the content all the time. The content is upgraded. We have big teams over there, so it's a big company. They upgrade the content, and we do upgrade the AI. Now, that part of the AI upgrade won't necessarily, won't have the brainwave stuff or the facial recognition because we're not there yet. But we're looking at that, and it's not clear if those are even going to pan out. Those are very difficult areas to do work in, and that's where I would say right now in kind of adaptive AI, that's really more of an exploratory area. It's really unclear how that's going to pan out. But saying that, there's been a lot of interesting stuff. I know this gal at MIT has done some stuff with interactive robots. I'm forgetting her name, but and it's really interesting stuff. And it's shown to be, that these interactive robots definitely increase engagement in young kids, and it can make a big difference. So, engagement is something big. How do we know if the student is engaged? How do we get them engaged? That's a lot of our focus too.
Well, and if you think back to school days, the classes that I found the most interesting tended to be the ones that I did the best in, or at least when I look at what I've been able to apply to work kind of in the field, almost regardless of what the grades looked like, and we don't have to go into what my grades looked like, the ones that you could say I had the best engagement with, that I found interesting, were the ones that I'm able to use, and bring into the real world a heck of a lot more than the ones that were like just kind of rote memorization.
Exactly. Now, the problem though is, unfortunately, a lot of these tests, they want kind of the rote memorization, if you will. I mean, not exactly, and that's a whole nother area that we could get into. My hope is that hopefully with all these innovations that we make in our systems, that'll eventually move on to the tests, because if the tests demand rote memorization and you want to teach creative learning, it can be a problem, because we're not giving the customers what they want, even though what we're giving them is good,
right,
and better than what they actually have. But that's because that's what the test is focusing on.
That's always the issue when you are trying to put a new kind of innovative product into a a system that has older traditional ties, right? Your product can be breakthrough, but there's a bit of systematic change that has to happen for kind of the best outcome
Right, for it
to take place.
to reach its potential, if you will. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And it really is. It's a constant battle kind of between those. I was the editorial director at Alex, an online math and chemistry instructional system.
Mm-hmm.
And I was the chief math architect. So, I was responsible for kind of building all the math kind of items and topics and things like that. And of course, we had to follow what the state standards want, what the Common Core wants. We're in the US. Alex is in the United States. But then there's other times where we'd say, what, this is we can do this on the computer. This will be a great item. This will be a great topic, the way that they can learn it there. And let's do that, even if it's not on a standard or whatever like that, because we think it's good. But you can't do, that you can't throw everything in like that, but you can throw in some. And then that's what I kind of think of as the way to kind of gradually change things, because then people see that and they go, wow, that's a really cool problem. Why don't we cover that in the tests? Or why isn't that on the standards? And so,
Sure.
I'm hopeful that hopefully that it'll get better, but we'll see.
Well, and now I think with kind of the interesting state of affairs and maybe the changing education landscape, some of that testing, standardized testing, may start to go up in the air a little bit, right? Especially as students are learning more online. You've got do I want to take courses at University A or University B or Coursera, or another online learning platform, or
right,
certification courses, to go right into the workforce. Maybe the value of the standardized tests starts to drop a little bit.
Yeah, and I think that, and we're kind of seeing that with colleges and stuff like that. I think the UC has said they want to, or maybe it wasn't the UC. I know one school system has said they're kind of moving away and they want to see if there's a better test than the SAT and things like that.
Sure.
Can I, Dan, can you tell me, like, how is the adoption of Squirrel AI and these the solution in the company doing in China? I mean, are they growing by leaps and bounds? I mean, size and scope?
Well, of course, the coronavirus has definitely thrown kind of a wrench into all of China, all of our schools, if you will. We're dealing with it now. They dealt with it before. So for sure, since January, there's been a lot of change, if you will. Our schools, all of our learning centers were closed for a period. I would say from February to maybe April. But then I know a lot of them are open now. A lot of schools in China are open, but not all. Like in Beijing, there's been some kind of issues, and so they'll partially close or things like that. I'm not 100% on all of that. So, but for sure, the last 6 months has been a very, very interesting environment, if you will, for us in terms of kind of all of those things. But and that's good. Saying that though, it was definitely growing very rapidly up until that point. The number of learning centers, I know that even a year and a half ago, I was saying it was like 1,000 or 1,100, and I know it's doubled, I think, since then. And just in terms of the data, because I see a lot of the data, I know that we are growing quite rapidly because the amount of data that I get is a lot more, right?
And speaking of COVID and that disruption in the
sure,
the learning centers, is it forcing you guys to think about that virtual product, and is that picking up steam?
Well, right, and that's actually exactly where we're kind of going. So, and we were kind of already doing that in terms of, remember, there were kind of two models, right? One was the kind of the learning centers where they go, but they still work on an online product, And then there was the online where they work on it virtually, but there's still kind of a helper or, a kind of he's a combination of emotional support, tutor if they need a little help, you know what I'm saying, for groups of students. As we look as that can still go on, right? But the scaling is just a little difficult with that, right? So if we can reduce that load and make it as much degree as possible kind of autonomous, or with no help needed, then that's better. But I can just tell you in reality, that's always tough to achieve, so, especially when you're dealing with younger kids and things like that. I mean, some kids will do extremely well. You can just put them in front of a computer and 5 hours later, they've worked through this much and this much and this much. And then with other kids, you're just not going to be able to do that. And unless you have somebody there to help them with the little issues they have or to keep their focus when they're losing it, it can be difficult. But that again is why, and we're working on things like gamification to help with that. You know what I'm saying? And that's big right now too. I should have mentioned that. We've done a lot of gamification to do that. Again, and that's where the focus on engagement is so important, because if they're engaged, they'll be more likely to really stick it through, and stay focused and do the things and not need as much support, if you will.
I'll tell you something. Any parents of grade school, middle school, probably high school aged kids at this point are probably nodding their heads right along with that. Like, I know exactly what you mean about keeping my kid engaged with the thing that they're supposed to be doing on their computer or on their tablet.
It really is. It's the number one thing. They got to be focused to learn, and that's the hardest part.
I got a few more follow-up questions.
Sure.
It could go in a million directions, Tom, it's crazy, but I noticed that there's a U.S. presence. So how does, I know that the Lions, the market is China. That's where he's focused on. That's where the volume's at. But where does it cross over the United States potentially?
So where it crosses over into the United States is that you have to understand that China is rapidly changing and rapidly growing. But in terms of their experience with, let's say, adaptive learning products and stuff, Squirrel AI is basically the first adaptive learning product in China, as far as I understand. Now, some people might argue about it and things like that, but in terms of that kind of product, and that, we were created in 2000, I think end of 2014, maybe 2015. So it's that's a short history. When I got hired was 2018, and Richard was hired a little before that. Richard, my boss, was a senior guy at Newton, and I was, again, editorial director and chief content architect of Alex, math content architect of Alex, and those were very big adaptive learning systems. And so the U.S. team is really, at this point, is kind of there to just add expertise and to work with others with expertise, so to collaborate kind of and make that bridge with the China team. As I said, we're working with CMU. We work with we work with some other groups. We've worked in the past with SRI, and we're still working with SRI, I think, too. But we work with these different groups, but we kind of facilitate that, and do further research. And they have a research team in Shanghai as well, and we work with them. But that's but the U.S. team is small, right? Because right now we're not looking to build a product in the U.S. at this time. That may change. As I say, things change very rapidly, and Derek is a very dynamic individual. So who knows what'll change? How it'll change in the future. But as it is right now, the U.S. team is small and just really there to kind of really add expertise in the kind of AI adaptive learning space and really work with a lot of the experts where in the United States, where basically we've had a lot more experience, right? Carnegie Learning, Alex, there's 20 years of kind of intelligent tutoring systems and, adaptive learning systems. So we have a lot of knowledge still, I would say, in the United States. There's just a lot more products that are much more mature. So, when you're looking for expertise in that, you're not going to find a lot of that type of experience in China, just because there hasn't been that long where they've been using those types of products.
Dan, I got a lot of, I would like to ask a question, and you can draw from your current employment, but previous employment, computer science, mathematics, the whole kit and caboodle. So you could take a global perspective as well as a science perspective, but we're entering this new paradigm, right? Where it's remote, we're talking about COVID, you're talking about gamification, adaptive learning. And, we're at this crux where it's like, I see my daughter on the computer, it's rote memorization, adaptive learning, whatever you want to call it, to get math scores. At the same time, we always have a computer or a mobile phone in our pocket. I'm thinking about the changing nature of education, right? In the sense that factory schools like the 1950s don't necessarily apply. And then we talk about gamification and building up and adaptive learning. I understand there's a market opportunity there, but in your opinion, what does the future look like, or what are the possibilities out there? Do we need to teach kids math if they have a computer there? And I know that we need fundamentals, but when I really look at my daughter, and we have every connected device, right? And it's monitored, but just the tools available to explore, what goes through your mind with all this stuff,
Well, that's some question
there. Sorry.
But let me put it to you this way. Let me see if I understand the question first. So I think one thing you're getting at, which is very kind of interesting and tricky, is one argument. Let's just take math, for example. Do students need to do a lot of arithmetic practice without a calculator, right? And versus with a calculator, right? And that a lot of teachers, and this gets to old arguments. I've taught a lot of math, and I've been in a lot of different school systems and things like that, and dealt with the school system. Some school systems and some kind of math faculty will say all for the calculator. They want to create a curriculum that's calculator based. They don't have to worry about doing the computations by hand or anything like that. And then there's complete people on the complete other extreme that want them to do everything by hand, and which slows things down to a certain extent, right? Is that what you're is that part of what you're getting at with the extra technology? How much do they actually need to learn of the nitty gritty details that, unless they're going to be an engineer in the field, they really don't need to know? Is that kind of
that's part of it. It's just, but also just technology in general. COVID is accelerated this notion of virtual learning and remoteness. Yeah. We talk about gamification, that's kind of its own tangent, but based upon your success, you've been a successful technology entrepreneur, researcher, mathematician. What should we be doing with all the technology that we have?
Here's what, if it's what should we be doing, I have an answer. What will we be doing? I don't know what.
That's what I'm getting at. What should we be doing?
I honestly can tell you, I have a very strong opinion on what we should be doing to change education. I saw a talk recently. I was at this conference, Beyond Multiple Choice, and I forget the name of the speaker, but he gave a great talk. And one thing he talked about was how much energy we put into education, and yet we don't see the scores go up at all, basically. If anything, they're going down. So here we are, we're throwing all this money, billions and billions of dollars. It's through the Department of Education. There's people studying, there's groups in learning, and yet with all that money, where are the better outcomes? Where are the better outcomes? They're not there. And so what I would argue is we're taking a completely wrong approach. I've taught a lot of martial arts, and that had a very profound effect on the way I teach and things like that. I don't believe in grades, for one thing. I don't believe that your grades should be based on performance. I don't believe that a student should get a B or an A based on their performance. In martial arts, some people come into the class, they're very inflexible, including me. Other people come into the class, they can do a splits right away. And that really affects their kicks, that affects everything else. What's important is your attitude and your commitment to the learning and everything else. And it doesn't matter if you're kind of the worst student and know the least. If you are working hard in a smart way, then you will improve. I have faith in that, and you will get better. And that's all that that's all that I should care about, basically. And so what I'd like to see is, I would like to see a systems that we go to where we don't try to do like 6th grade, 7th grade, or any of that kind of stuff. We don't have grades. What we have is we have modules, okay? Very small modules, if you will, where people get like a badge, a proficiency badge, right? And maybe there's like, passed, and then there's like, passed with honors or something like that. That's it. That's your grade, right? So you did fractions, part 1, fractions 1, you passed that. You have that badge. That means you can take the fractions 2 class. Did you get the badge? Okay. And you can take it over and over again until you get your badge, basically, until you get that success. So it really would change the focus. And then grades are just based on your kind of attitude. How hard are you trying? Or there's an attitude score. And so we move away from things like grades and instead just go to kind of competencies, core competencies, and kind of make them into small chunks, if you will. And I think actually to deliver that on the computer is actually makes it they're very sympathetic together. I think that there's a lot of synergies. So, they work on modules. The modules are small. They get a pass, or not. Maybe every 2 years or 3 years, you got to renew. You got to take a little test to show that your badge is still valid, if you will. And that's more the way we should go. And so, and you group students based on kind of where they are with their competencies, and we focus less on grades, and just, they want to get as many competencies as they can. And of course, if they can get like with honors, that's great, but really focus on that. That's what I'd love to see. I doubt we will see that, but that's.
And I got to tell you, I love this for a couple of reasons. One, because I like the modularity of it. If there are certain pieces that a student is doing better at or not as good, you can still move and progress, and it's not as strictly lockstep and kind of big batch as our grade system at the moment. But I'll tell you that the part that I really like, as you're talking about, especially the attitude and how it actually correlates to like life at work and the workforce. And, I say this having years of being the low guy on the totem pole and also in upper management positions. When I've had folks that have the core competence set and then have the positive attitude, the quality of the work that comes out of the latter is so much. It's like night and day, and the guy with the bad attitude might be able to turn around a work product that's great. Maybe he's a genius, but if I can't get that to work with this other thing that I've got going on the other side of the company, or this other project that's happening, then it's not useful.
Yep.
And I don't know. I think it speaks so much better towards success in the workplace than the current system that we have. So I'm a fan. I'm in.
Well, that's great. I would add one other thing, which is just to say, it also, I think that the system would make it, a lot of students, the reason they do poorly is they basically turned off to education. They've been beaten down, if you will. And I think that part of that, it's like there is no way for them to succeed where they currently are. There literally is no way for them to succeed. And if it's like that, then why would you expect them to succeed, right? If they're in a 7th grade class where they have 4th grade reading levels and stuff like that, and they're supposed to get through the 7th grade curriculum, how are they going to do that? How are they going to do that? They're not, and they're going to get an F, basically, right? What you need to do is you need to put that person in the right class where they can really learn and give them a lot of positive, reinforce, try to really push, get them motivated. But they have to have a way to get success. It's funny. I knew a guy once, he was telling me that he graduated high school, but barely. And, you know, I have a PhD. So, you know, we were kind of talking and, you know, he was like, yeah, I never like school. This guy is one of the smartest guys in terms of history and things like that. He always brings up very important points. You know, barely could pass high school. He told me that when he was in 9th grade, he basically had never tried. He was, you know, a very poor student. He finally tried on this essay. He tried his hardest. He put in like 30 hours for weeks on this essay, and he got a D. And it destroyed him. It destroyed him. You know, it was like, because the grade wasn't based on his effort. The grade was based on whatever the teacher's criteria was, you know, but that destroyed him, and he never learned after that.
It's just also like I'm kind of curious as to why doesn't China adopt something like that? I mean, yeah, those people are fighting for the spots, because I used to work in China a lot. I understand that, you know, but at the same time, the population being just so huge, it's like there's got to be different ways to kind of handle this that's more beneficial to society as a whole, right? I mean, because you want to move the bar, right? Not just, of course, as families, we want to move the bar with our child, but like as a society, you want to move the bar. And you're right. If that's a real epiphany, and I never even thought of it like that because I'm not an educator, right, Tom? Like, there's no way for the guy that Dan references with the 4th grade reading education to succeed in a 7th grade. So why would you but I just never thought of it like that, you know? And that's a different measuring stick when you're looking at groups and populations of people, right? And we see this with technology, right? We don't have enough of these technologists in these jobs, and then we bring them in, you know? And it's like, but I'm seeing the tech industry and highly encouraging my daughter to kind of think about seriously doing a bunch of cloud certifications, going to you know, a state school, getting that degree, because we're in this timeline of like, you still kind of need it, but we don't know if you need it, and just be very practical, you know, about like every decision, knowing that things are accelerating in technology at this gigantor rate, and just be on the cusp of that, you know?
Yeah, I think, and I think that that's what's going to be so interesting over the next 5 to 10 years, is where those changes are. You know, I gave a recommendation. Again, I don't think anything like that is exactly going to happen, but what will happen, and I know that goes back to your original question, but I would really, I think the one thing that I will say that is encouraging is you are seeing a lot more of these certifications and things like that. And I think that is really in the right direction. And I would love to see it much more in schools. You know, the last thing I'll say about this, I used to teach 9th grade math in Carson High School in South Los Angeles. And, you know, I had some pretty bad students. They came from very kind of tough areas sometimes too. Anyways, in 9th grade math, it's basically like pre-algebra, right? You're teaching fractions, decimals, you know, like this.
Sure.
But you know, one thing that is amazing is even just think about the order that schools teach it in, right? So if I'm in 9th grade, in my 9th grade class, because of what my math teacher did or whatever, I maybe teach fractions for the first month of class, and then I teach decimals or, you know, whatever, okay? But then Joe over at another school, or even in my same school, he might do it in a different order, okay? Now, imagine I transfer a student. A student transfers because he's doing basketball now. I mean, he goes from this class where he just did fractions to my class where he's now going to do fractions again because I covered it before. You know, I covered decimal. I did it in a different order than his teacher. And I mean, I bring that up because it's such a concrete example and such a fail, right? Because how can it be that a student transfers into a different math class and yet he's not going to get at all the right education? Like his 9th grade math will be fractions twice and no decimals.
Yeah. And how's that going to set them up for 10th grade?
Exactly. And it's like, and I mean, just that's reality, right? If you have a big, if you're not doing a modular type style and you're saying, this is what I'm going to do in my 9th grade math class or my 11th grade math class or my algebra or whatever, unless everybody's teaching in the same order and teaching the same things, they're not even getting, you don't know what you get even at the next level. And that's what's so frustrating as an educator. I feel like we're so far behind on that. and we're not thinking about those types of things. So again, there's so many advantages to the modular system, right? Because in the modular system, they pass fractions or they pass decimals, or, they have to do that module.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking about when you said that, Dan, is that modularity solves that issue completely.
Yeah, it really does.
And once you get kids, well, students, I should say, generally, onto computers, and now you've got, I guess, let's say more easily trackable data behind that.
Yeah.
It feels like the doors open up, because now, as long as you treat it kind of modularly, like you're discussing, now you can start to do things. And of course, anytime we start talking about more and more data these days, computational intelligence, machine learning, and those types of topics start to come up. And you can obviously tell where I'm steering the conversation now, right? And it seems like, and there's a lot of talk about using machine learning, using artificial intelligence to improve learning. But like we've discussed before, Dan, in our previous conversation, AI is no panacea.
No. And in fact, I would still argue that, it's, to me, although the things about engagement, I think it's going to be very interesting to see how the AI part of it plays out, for sure. I do think by making it modular, you do also help the AI in some ways. Although, to be honest, some of the power, like in the models that I work on and stuff like that, like if you were to, one thing that's kind of interesting is if you think about just this simple thing that most people used to learn, at least when I was in school, if you choose a number, how many questions does it take you if you choose a number between 1 and 1 million, how many questions will it take me to figure out what number you chose, right? And it'll take me 20 questions, because 2 to the 20th is a little over 1 million. Okay, so I can just cut it in half. What was your number greater than 500,000? No. Okay, then I know it's between 1 and 500,000. Is your number greater than 250,000? No. Okay, then I know it's between 1 and 250,000, and so forth, right? So sure. In a sense, I could take 1 million questions and figure out exactly what in only 20 questions, which is kind of cool. Now, on the other hand, it takes me 2 questions to figure out what number you chose between 1 and 4. Right? So that's not very impressive, right?
Sure.
It's like that when you have a smaller set, it's the AI is kind of less powerful, if you will, or can be less powerful, because you lose that ability to kind of to do this amazing thing over a large set. Because just from what I told you, it's just there's no way to kind of overcome that issue. As the sets get smaller, you need a relative more amount of questions, just because you're cutting much more up. When you have a big set, with 1 question, you can do a lot more to that big set. I'm not sure if I'm being clear on that.
No, yeah.
It does make a difference.
Completely. I got another kind of question that's philosophical, educational related. Like, again, I have one daughter. She's going to be a junior in high school. I was educated in Canada, so much the same, right? In the 70s, much the same educational system, but a little bit different.
Sure.
But like, why is this? I think we have to differentiate between learning and testing, right? I mean, I know you have that line, but I just feel, Dan, that an extraordinary amount of time with my daughter is not actually reading, digesting, appreciating the material. It's about getting ready for an exam. And yeah. Now, when you talk about modularity of these things, I mean, you pass it and you move on, you have learned it, right? You're certified, whatever you want to call it. But like, we spend, I don't know, the mind share in my household about getting ready for a test or handing in an assignment as to proof, as assessment, scoring, is like we're not even learning anything. I think, dude, it's in one ear, out the other ear. It's a regurgitation thing. And by the way, she's at one of the best public high schools you can go to, open enrolled. I drive her 35 miles. So, I mean, what's your opinion on that? I mean, am I just a disgruntled parent, or am I incorrect?
No. And I think that what a wise man in education once told me that when we assess students, the students aren't learning, we're learning about the students. And I think that that's very true. And that's kind of what you're saying, right? That it's not that your daughter's learning, the teachers are learning about what your daughter knows, right? That's what all the testing is for. And of course, a lot of students get kind of, they have testing phobias and things like that. So who knows how even accurate that test is of that person's ability, right? Because if there is kind of phobias and things like that, it may underestimate the person to some degree, right? And so, I think that that's really true. And one of the things I do in the AII design and things like that is I try to keep the assessments, the formal assessments, to as minimal as possible. And instead just kind of focus on the whole performance as the student is working through there. Now, you probably can't remove assessments completely, or that may hurt performance a little bit, but for sure you can try to minimize them as much as possible. And then when you use them, maybe we can do a better job of better use them. So, like, again, going back to martial arts, I know this sounds weird, but whenever you take a test, which is like an assessment, so in my martial arts, Subak Do, you test for a stripe or a belt or something like that, right? And to be a black belt, it's 10 stripes or 10 rankings. So you would have to do 10 tests before you could get a black belt, right? And these tests would come every 3 months, let's say. So they're not that often, right? They're once every 3 months. And, there's good reason for it. I think that the tests are good from that standpoint. It is a challenge. But, one thing after the test, and you always find out that there's things you're good at and there's things you're bad at. But again, if you go back to the attitude thing, it's not a bad thing then, because it's not that the test actually is informative to me. And one of the things that my master used to like to say, or always does after a test, whenever you go up to hear the results of your test, he asks you, what did you do best on the test? What are some things you did best on the test? And you have to say. And then what are the things that you did worst on the test? And you have to say. This is before you've actually been given the results of your test, right? So this is your self-awareness of your own performance, for example. And I think that it makes the test much more valuable, for example. But we don't do that right now, right? I mean, again, it's just test them, find out what they know and stuff like that, instead of having them. And I know some teachers, for example, they like to have students correct their test. And I think that's a very good thing, like just going along those lines. And especially, you want to talk about motivation. I'll tell you this, students learn a lot. If they get a 60 on a test and you say, you can correct it and get up to a 90, let's say, if you can correct all the errors, they will go through and they will do it very diligently. And they actually do a lot, I would argue, in that period, right? They're motivated because they know they'll do better, they'll get a better score on this test if they can do that, and so forth, So I don't want to come down completely on the tests. I think that we could do a lot of things to make them more useful, maybe, and more part of the whole learning experience. But for sure, I think it's important for our AIs, probably the AI systems, to avoid kind of the need for formal testing to as much degree as possible.
Yeah, I just wonder if I'm talking about the imbalance of learning to, like, this is what's going to be on the test, guys. This is what you got to know. And I don't know. I just kind of question, learning, when you watch your kid come through the door and have like 5 hours of homework, and she didn't truly. So the phenomenon with me was that she was like a couple of A's, B's during regular school, and when COVID happened, she got straight A's because she was like, I can finish in 3 hours and I don't have to mess around. Right. So to me, the way she would describe it, now she's got a dry sense of humor like me, is that it was like glorified daycare at this upper level high school, and I was like, sounds like it when you hear these stories on and on and on. And then here it's just like, I'm just going to speed through it and get through it. So it's, again, on the nature of education and this technology, it just makes me question as a parent in technology, like what.
Yeah, what's the use of it? I mean, what are they learning? So I have to tell you, I'm actually in complete agreement about that. My son, or my youngest son especially. So one thing that just as an aside, that I have as an educator, this is completely, this is my opinion only. I read it from this book, but I'm not going to give you any objective justification for it. But I firmly believe that this is one of the most important and profound distinctions you can make when you're talking about learning. So what that distinction is to me, there's kind of two poles in learning. There's algorithmic learning and there's understanding learning. Okay, now everybody is on a continuum. It's not that you're one or the other, but you can lean one way or the other. And when I was a teacher, and I've taught a lot of statistics, a lot of math at various levels, always when I look at my students kind of in my class, if it's a smaller class, 30 or under, I know all of my students, and I can literally go around and say, understanding learn, algo learn, understanding learn, so forth. So, and the difference is that an understanding learner will only learn something when they understand it, okay? An algo learner just wants the cookbook, wants to know what the recipe is so that I can get the right answer. They don't need to understand anything. And the analogy, the kind of the case I like to give is this one. So when I would teach exponents, let's say in high school or middle school, so I go, okay, we're going to learn the product rule of exponents. Okay, so what's x to the third times x to the fourth, or something like that? And there's a rule. They show the rule in the book, right? X to the a times x to the b is x to the a plus b. But I never teach that. Not to start. I say, look, what does x to the third mean? It means x times x times x. What does x to the fourth mean? X times x times x times x. Okay, so how many x's am I multiplying there? 7. Oh, so it's x to the 7th. I'm just using my definition of exponents. So I'll do that. We'll do that together as a class, okay? We'll do like 5 examples. We'll go through it. Then after I'm done with that, I'll say, okay, actually notice we always do the same thing. We just add the exponents together. That's all we have to do. There's our rule, okay? When I do that, usually more than half the class goes, Mr. Binman, why didn't you tell me that was the rule in the first place? Why did you waste all of our time with this other stuff? Huh. There's an algo learner right there. They don't want to know the reasoning behind it. They just need to know the rule. They'll memorize it, and that's good enough. Okay? An understanding learner will not learn something unless they understand it. And I know a lot of people like that. And it's literally, they will not, and like, if you ask my wife, she's that way. My wife is brilliant though. I mean, when she understands it, she understands it well, but if she doesn't understand it fully, she doesn't feel comfortable. It's like she freezes up. You know what I'm saying? I mean, it's like the understanding fully is the need for that to learn can be very strong with people. And I think that actually really hurts them in the current system. And so, like, for example, my youngest son.
I agree with you 100%. Because I'm one of those kind of people.
And trust me, when I talk to people, they'll just even say, I'm an understanding thinker too. I had to, when I was doing Fourier analysis and we were doing the e to the I sine, whatever it is, the complex, the Euler formula, it's like, I hated that. It didn't make any sense to me. And I get these old books on like Fourier transforms and stuff like that. And they didn't use that. They used the regular sinusoids. And one time I ran into a stats professor from Northwestern. I was at an Alex thing. We were talking and I said, he was an engineer. I said, that's the thing is it's like, I don't understand. I never understood that well, but it was like, I had to learn it. And the guy even told me, he goes, yes, nobody understands it very well. He goes, we sacrifice understanding for a great reduction in computational, all the stuff. It just simplifies things tremendously. But nobody had ever even told me that. Nobody told me that. And I was like, wow, now at least you've given me a justification for why it's there.
Yeah.
This hits home so much. You'll appreciate this. I was in, high school, I think it was, and I love math. I'm an electrical engineer now, so I've taken, plenty of math courses in my time. But there was this one class that I was struggling with, and we're trying to figure out why, because, this was a topic that I really like. And I sat down finally with my teacher, and we were taking a look at a test. And he's like, Tom, are you reading the books, the homework assignments that I give? And I was like, yeah, sometimes. It's like, because you're not making it through the tests. And if you're reading the books, then you should know what all these formulas are. You're spending all your time deriving them.
Right.
And that was the issue, that I wasn't memorizing the formulas. I'd get to the test and work them out. And I'd get 60% of the way through the test and the time was up.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's exactly what you're talking about, though. I like the way you put that. Now I got a label for it.
Yeah, no, and honestly, let me ask you this. When it comes to a person in a job, or you're going to build a new thing, which do you think is more advantageous there? Algorithmic learning or understanding learning? Well,
of course, it depends a little bit on the role. So I'll predicate that. But if we're building something new, I want the understanding. Because
exactly right. I 100% agree. Exactly.
There's going to be variables, and we got to be able to work with them.
If you're building something new, you got to have that. Now, saying this, I got to tell you something. I literally, so remember I said in my class, I actually believe both are very important. And what you said was exactly along those lines. Sometimes, like maybe you're in a battle or something like that. The guy's like, this is the way you operate the tank. Put the thing in and you do this. And you know what?
That's right.
You don't need to understand it. You got to follow the orders and you got to do it, whatever it is, right? Or if you're a doctor or a nurse or something like that. I mean, it's really important that you can follow an algo. Okay. And so, and trust me, I had to do that with myself. I had to deal with that. Like that was a personal struggle for me. But I eventually, I'm pretty good. I can do that. I can turn off the understanding part if necessary. It bothers me. You know what I'm saying? It's like, I don't understand this at all, but okay. You know what I'm saying? But yeah, that's an important part. And so when I would teach it in a class, I always kind of feel like the understanding learners need to move and also become more, have better facilities with formulas and algorithms. And the algo learners need to get to do better at the the understanding, and that really both are super important. But for sure, for creating new things and things like that, you got to have the understanding. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to do it.
Yeah,
and that's what we've lost completely. I would argue in our education right now, we don't have a lot of that. We've totally gone towards the kind of the algo thinkers. All of our tests, everything is geared towards the algo thinkers. And that's kind of what Dan was saying, I think, about his daughter, right? In the high school and stuff like that. And she's at a good high school, but that's just what it is, because that's what our tests do. That's what everything else does. And it's very unfortunate, but I think it's, it's just part of the reality. We've really moved in that direction.
Well, also, like, even in, Silicon Valley, right? And they're talking about hiring technology folks. And all they do is test them for algorithmic thinkers. Now, that seems logical on its face value, but like the majority of these people aren't doing doing big time code into the computer all day and the console and all these different things. They're actually managing teams of infrastructures and architectures and looking at things out of the box. So it's like I don't necessarily agree with the approach of only testing for an algorithmic thinker in all types of industries. Like what is your function and role to do? If it is just building code, that's code. But I have not been this prolific coder, and I've instructed coders how to architect things, and it blew their minds. So it's just I don't know the way we're set up to assess people and what's correct and not, and we're so moving so quickly that we're not taking stock of these things, right? We're just
I 100% agree. And actually, so we could, again, this is just my opinion, but I would tell this to my stats class. My explanation for the financial crisis of 2008, there's a lot of explanations. Don't get me wrong. There's a lot of things that did it. To me, though, I look at it as a fundamental flaw of the algo thinkers, actually. So what happened is that you had a lot of these guys, they were doing these, the credit default swaps and things like that. But basically, they were making the classic they were basically interpolating, they were extending the regression line, if you will, much farther than they should have, right? It's like, when I teach regression, for example, I teach them all the time. It's like, you cannot just take the regression line to its extension. At that rate, if you look at the 100-meter times, men will be running in under 0 seconds, the 100 meters in the year 3024. You know what I'm saying? It's like, you have to think about that to some degree before you make that. And what I kind of see the financial crisis of 2008 was coming from was you had a lot of these young analysts who are great, technical algo type people. And it's just like, there's the formula. It's going to go up 40% next year. Even though it went up 50 last year and 60 the year before, it's just going to keep on going. And it's like, no, it won't. You know what I'm saying? So and that's where kind of understand what's the process. Does it usually do this? What's the history on this? But that's not there, right? And again, even when I teach like regression, for example, they have to understand, and I say this all the time, when you do any type of predictive science, you really, really need to be careful about going out of your domain, right? The domain that you fit on. If you go outside of your domain, you're now in an iffy area. You don't actually have any data on that, right? And so, and that's where I think you have to be, very careful. And that's where, and we're not rewarding that. We actually reward sloppiness, what I would say right now. A lot of times we're rewarding kind of sloppy thinking, if you will.
Well, the scary part about that, Dan, is it's now being, I'm not one to kind of go the evil AI and AI is taking over humanity. I kind of try to focus on the optimistic things. But the way they recruit in HR systems, the way they work, it is hard coding that biased thinking, right? Because it's looking for keywords and stuff like that. So the pool of people kind of in organizations, whatever they may be, is selected based on that flawed, algorithmic thinking and algorithmic choice of humans in a frickin', supposed to be an emotionally aware, emotionally intelligent, framework. And even that is algorithmically kind of thought of, do you have emotional intelligence? It's like crazy.
And to some degree, I think it's because it's much easier to do it that way. That's just reality. Yeah. It's very hard to measure the kind of the understanding thinking and where they are with that and how that matches with what their algo thinking is to kind of tell me what their overall capability is. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, so I do. But it's not optimal, right?
No, I agree. I 100% agree. I agree with that. I got to say, I had a profound thought. Well, I thought it was profound. One day, I argue with my son a lot about AI and things like that, right? And, he's of the group that thinks that AI will take over the world in 20 or 30 years, it's smarter than man. I'm completely on the other side. But anyways, one day, and I've looked into it different, it's kind of interesting. I don't know if you guys have talked about much, but in the kind of AI community, it's kind of split. I've seen both sides. Anyways, one day I was running and I was thinking about how if I just focused on an AI that just tries to maximize how the AI, literally the AI system is doing in the world, that's much easier to do than any other type of constraint, right? Because it's easy to focus on how you're doing. How you're doing. I'm hungry, or I'm wet. I haven't slept in 20. I know that's not an AI, that's me. But it's like, it's easy to focus on that. So if I don't have that, if I'm wet, if I'm hungry, then that's not very good for me. And if I'm full and I have a nice house over my head, that's good for me. And it's just easy to measure. Now, if I was to try to use some other measurement to try to focus my AI to kind of achieve, it's like the greater good. Let's say I said that. So I have two choices. I'm going to have my AI focus on the greater good of society, or I'm going to have my AI focus on how it itself is doing in this world. I don't even know how to define the greater good for society, right? So I don't know how I could even build that type of AI, but I know how it's very easy to kind of have monitoring on how you are doing. That's a very simple measurement, right? And so that AI seems like much easier to do. I think that happens a lot with these types of systems. It's kind of like, we go in the area that it's much easier to do it, kind of.
Well, the other argument to that is that the AI will make a decision that humanity's hurting each other, so they should be eradicated.
Right, like the old Star Trek or whatever. Yeah, sure. Right. I mean, right, and that's the AI for good, right? That's the good AI, right? Because it's looking out after. But again, that's a really slick. That's a tough one, right? Very hard to define. What is the greater good exactly, right? Very, very hard to define.
Well, I mean, it's a fascinating discussion, and I don't know if this COVID becomes extended, remote learning and learning in general might take a much different shape out of necessity. So like we'll see what I hope that it does for the good. But it's been a fascinating conversation. I mean, we're way over time, but like we could continue to talk if you have time, but like it's been such a delight.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of All Things Data. If you enjoyed this show and want more, please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, and others, or via RSS so you'll never miss a show. While you're at it, if you found value in this show, we'd appreciate a rating or a review. Until next time.